as twilight descended, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. Our small band, led by Alder, ventured deeper into this realm of ancient mysteries. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and wild heather, and every step I took felt like a further plunge into a forgotten world. I, alongside my companions, felt a growing sense of foreboding as we navigated through the thick mist that clung to the moor like a shroud. Emerging from the swirling fog, a figure appeared, ethereal and imposing. It was Morven, the guardian of the moor, a being who seemed to be both part of the land and apart from it. Her form was an unsettling amalgamation of human and beast, embodying the wild spirit of the moor. Her eyes, glowing with an intense, otherworldly light, seemed to carry the weight of centuries, reflecting the deep connection she had with this land. "I am Morven." Her voice echoed around us, a haunting melody that seemed to resonate with the very soul of the moor. Once a protector of balance, now a sentinel of a realm in agony. Her gaze, piercing and discerning, lingered on me, as if she could see the determination and apprehension warring within me. She spoke of a deep, insidious corruption that had seeped into the moor, a darkness born from reckless experiments that tampered with the delicate balance of nature. The land I had come to revere was now a shadow of its former self, its essence tainted by an unseen malevolence. Elspeth, with a fierce light in her eyes, stepped forward. "Tell us how we can help," she said, her voice firm with resolve. Liam, ever the stoic leader, had a grave expression, understanding the weight of Morven's words. I knew then that our journey was no longer just a search for answers. It had become a quest to save the moor from the clutches of this dark blight. Morven's tale was a lament for the moor, a place once vibrant with natural magic, now withering under an unnatural shadow. The heart of this corruption, she revealed, lay deep within the moor, a place where the land's agony was most acute. A sense of purpose solidified within us. We had been chosen, by fate or by the land itself, to embark on a perilous journey to heal the moor. As we prepared to delve into the heart of this enigmatic land, I felt a profound connection to Morven, the guardian whose fate was intertwined with that of the moor. With a mixture of trepidation and determination, we set forth on our quest. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, but I knew that we were the moor's last hope. As we ventured deeper into its heart, I couldn't help but feel that our fates, and the fate of the moor, were now irrevocably entwined. The dawn broke over the moor with a melancholy light, casting long, somber shadows across the landscape. We gathered around Morven, the guardian, whose presence seemed to blend seamlessly with the wild beauty of the moor. As the first rays of sunlight touched her form, she appeared both formidable and solemn, a creature bound to the fate of this land. Morven began to recount her story, her voice a haunting echo that seemed to carry the sorrow of the moor itself. "Long ago," she began, "this land thrived in harmony, its magic pure and uncorrupted." Her eyes, reflecting the dawn's light, held a depth of ancient knowledge. "I was its protector, a guardian chosen by the forces of nature to maintain the balance." As she spoke, the air around us seemed to still, as if the moor itself was listening, mourning its lost guardian. Morven described a time when the moor was a tapestry of vibrant life, its magic a gentle pulse beneath the earth, a rhythm that guided all life here. But then, Morven's voice grew heavier. Men came, driven by a thirst for knowledge and power. They delved into the forbidden, tampering with the essence of the moor. Her expression turned pained, and the sorrow in her voice was palpable. Their experiments twisted the natural order, unleashing energies they could not control. As she recounted the tale, the landscape around us seemed to respond. The wind whispered more urgently through the grass, and the distant hills appeared to shroud themselves in a deeper gloom, as if echoing her lament. "I tried to stop them," Morven continued, her voice barely more than a whisper. "But the magic they unleashed was beyond my understanding. It changed me. binding me to the corruption, making me both its prisoner and its reluctant guardian. I could see the conflict within her, a struggle between her duty to protect and the agony of witnessing the Moor's desecration. "The land began to change," she said, "warped by the dark magic. Creatures of the Moor, once gentle and benign, turned into twisted versions of themselves, reflections of the corruption that had seeped into their home." We listened in silence, her words settling over us like a shroud. The Moor, which had always seemed timeless and enduring, was now a land in torment, crying out for salvation. "The source of this corruption," Morven said, her gaze turning toward the heart of the Moor, "lies deep within. It is a place where the earth bleeds dark magic, a wound that festers unhealed." Her eyes met mine, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. "You seek to confront this darkness," she stated, more than asked. "But be warned, the path is perilous, and the land will test your resolve." Liam stepped forward, his face set in determination. "We have to try," he said firmly. "The village, the Moor, they're counting on us." Morven nodded, understanding the weight of our decision. "Then I will guide you to the edge of the corruption. From there, you must journey alone. The path you seek is one I cannot tread, for my presence would only awaken the land's anger." As the morning progressed, the Moor seemed to awaken around us, its beauty belying the dark secret we were now privy to. We prepared for our journey, each of us lost in our thoughts, aware of the monumental task that lay ahead. Morven's story was not just a tale of her descent, but a warning of the treacherous path we were about to embark upon. The Moor, with its rolling hills and whispering winds, seemed to watch us, a silent observer to the unfolding story. As we set out, led by Morven to the edge of the corrupted land, I couldn't help but feel that we were stepping into a chapter of the Moor's history that would be remembered for generations to come. The day waned as we trekked back to the village, the weight of Morven's revelations heavy upon us. The Moor, a sprawling tapestry of heather and bracken, seemed to watch us with a somber gaze, its secrets now partially unveiled, but no less daunting. Upon reaching the village, the air was thick with a tension that mirrored the unease within us. The villagers, unaware of the true nature of the Moor's plight, continued their daily toil. Yet there was an undercurrent of apprehension, a sense of impending doom that had seeped into the very stones of the buildings. I found myself gazing at the faces around us, wondering how to convey the gravity of our discovery. Beside me, Liam's jaw was set in a firm line, his eyes scanning the village, no doubt contemplating the same dilemma. Elspeth, her usual fiery demeanor somewhat subdued, walked with a contemplative expression, lost in thought. It was at the village center that we gathered the villagers, the setting sun casting long shadows across the gathered crowd. Liam stepped forward, his voice steady as he began to share the truth of the Moor's corruption. Murmurs of disbelief and fear rippled through the crowd as the tale unfolded, the reality of our situation dawning on them. As the discussion evolved, it became clear that the village was divided. Duncan, a prominent figure among the villagers, voiced his dissent loudly. "We cannot simply stand by and hope for a miracle," he argued, his voice tinged with frustration. "We need to take action, fight back against whatever is causing this blight." His words stirred a chorus of agreement among some of the villagers, a reflection of their growing desperation. The air was charged with a sense of urgency, a collective need for action, however misguided. Liam, maintaining his composure, addressed the crowd. "Rash actions could provoke further harm," he cautioned. "We need to understand the nature of this corruption if we are to stand any chance against it." The debate continued, the evening air becoming a crucible of differing opinions and clashing wills. I stood there, feeling the weight of responsibility on our shoulders. The village needed leadership, a unified direction, but the path forward was shrouded in uncertainty. In the midst of the heated discussion, I suggested a compromise. "Let us send a small team to scout the Moor to gather information," I proposed, hoping to bridge the divide. "Understanding our enemy is the first step in defeating it." After a moment of contemplative silence, the villagers agreed, albeit reluctantly. It was decided that a reconnaissance team, including myself, Liam, Elspeth, and a few others, would set out at dawn to probe the edges of the corruption. That night, as I lay restless, the events of the day replayed in my mind. The village, once a haven of simplicity and peace, now stood at the crossroads of a crisis that threatened to unravel the very fabric of our existence. The following morning, under a sky streaked with the first light of dawn, our small team assembled at the edge of the village. We were a mix of determination and apprehension, aware that the journey ahead was fraught with unknown dangers. As we ventured into the moor, the land seemed to respond to our presence. The air grew heavier, the silence more profound. The moor, with its undulating hills and dense thickets, felt like a living entity, watching us with an unseen gaze. Each step took us further from the safety of the village, deeper into the heart of a mystery that had, until now, remained hidden beneath the surface of the land. The moor stretched out before us, a land of haunting beauty and lurking dangers, holding its breath as we delved into its secrets. The moor under the early morning light was a landscape transformed. The beauty of the heath, usually so comforting, now took on a sinister edge as we ventured further into its heart. The air was thick with a sense of dread, the usual sounds of wildlife eerily absent. It felt like walking into the maw of some slumbering beast. As we progressed, the land itself seemed to resist us. The ground grew marshier, swallowing our feet with each step, while brambles, more vicious than any I'd seen, tore at our clothes and skin. Damn! Elspeth cursed softly, pulling free from a thorny grip that left a small trail of blood on her arm. The further we went, the more seemed to warp around us. Trees, once majestic and towering, now appeared gnarled and twisted, their branches clawing at the sky like the fingers of the dead. The very air seemed to thicken, a miasma that clung to our lungs and filled each breath with a taste of decay. It was midday when we encountered our first tangible sign of the corruption Morven had spoken of. A clearing, unnaturally circular, lay before us, the ground scorched and barren. At its center, a tree stood, its bark blackened and oozing a tar-like substance. The sight of it sent a shiver down my spine. Liam approached the tree, his expression grim. This isn't natural," he murmured, examining the dark sap. "It's like the life's been sucked right out of it." Then came the noises. A series of unsettling, guttural growls that seemed to emanate from all around us. We weren't alone. From the shadows emerged figures, their forms barely recognizable as once human. They were twisted by the Moor's corruption, their bodies grotesque parodies of their former selves. "Shit," muttered one of our companions, fear evident in his voice. The creatures moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, their eyes hollow pits of despair. As they approached, a putrid smell of decay filled the air. We readied ourselves, weapons drawn, knowing that these were no longer the people they once were. They were something else, something born of the Moor's dark heart. The fight was brutal and desperate. The creatures, though seemingly mindless, were incredibly resilient, their bodies not yielding to injuries that would fell any normal being. Elspeth's staff arced through the air, connecting with a sickening crunch, while Liam's sword moved in lethal, precise strikes. I found myself grappling with one of the creatures, its face a horrifying mask of twisted features. Its strength was immense, but driven by adrenaline and fear, I managed to thrust my knife into its grotesque form. The creature let out a chilling, inhuman wail before collapsing into the earth, which seemed to absorb it, as if reclaiming a lost child. Breathless and shaken, we regrouped. The encounter had taken a toll on us, both physically and mentally. The realization that these creatures were once people, villagers perhaps, was a horror too great to fully comprehend. "We need to keep moving," Liam said, his voice steady despite the pallor of his face. "We can't let their sacrifice be in vain." As we continued our trek, the moor seemed to grow even more hostile. Strange markings appeared on the stones and trees, symbols that made my head throb with a dull ache the longer I looked at them. The atmosphere was charged with a malevolent energy, as if the very air was alive with malice. Near the day's end, Fiona, one of our group, stumbled upon a hidden path. It was narrow, barely visible, winding deeper into the moor. The path felt intentional, as if inviting us or luring us towards something unknown. "We should follow it," Rowan, another companion, suggested cautiously. "It could lead us to the heart of this corruption." With a collective sense of trepidation, we embarked down the hidden path. The horrors we had faced were just the beginning, I feared. The moor was changing before our eyes, becoming a land of nightmares, and we were walking deeper into its darkest secrets. The hidden path led us deeper into the moor, a winding trail shrouded by an oppressive gloom that seemed to swallow even the faint light of the setting sun. The landscape around us had taken on an otherworldly aspect, the ground pulsing subtly as if breathing, the trees twisted into grotesque shapes, their branches writhing like tortured souls. A sense of unease clung to us, a primal fear of the unknown that gnawed at our resolve. The air was thick, heavy with a scent that was both sweet and nauseating, a stench of decay and corruption that seemed to seep into our very bones. As night fell, the path brought us to the mouth of a cavern, its entrance a gaping maw in the earth. The air emanating from it was cold and fetid, carrying a palpable sense of malevolence. "Holy hell," whispered Fiona, her voice barely audible over the sound of our ragged breaths. The cavern was like the beating heart of the moor's corruption. The walls pulsed with a sickly glow, veins of dark energy throbbing with a sinister rhythm. The ground was slick with a substance that seemed to shift and writhe under our feet, and the air was filled with the echoes of distant, tormented screams. It was here, in this nightmarish abyss, that we witnessed the true horror of the corruption. Huddled in the shadows was a figure, barely recognizable as human. It was a villager, his body convulsing in agony as the dark magic of the moor coursed through him. We watched, frozen in horror, as his body contorted, bones cracking and flesh tearing. The transformation was grotesque, a perversion of nature. His screams echoed off the cavern walls, a symphony of pain and despair, as he morphed into a creature of nightmare, a werewolf, its eyes glowing with a feral, unholy light. "Jesus Christ!" gasped Rowan, his face pale in the cavern's eerie light. The creature lunged at us, driven by a hunger that was no longer human. The fight was frantic, a desperate struggle for survival in the heart of darkness. Elspeth's staff found its mark, and Liam's sword danced with lethal precision, but the creature was relentless. In the chaos, I found myself grappling with the beast, its hot breath a stench of death in my face. With a surge of adrenaline, I plunged my knife into its hide, a lucky strike to the heart. The werewolf let out a final, pained howl before collapsing, the light in its eyes fading. We stood there, panting, our bodies and spirits battered. The cavern around us felt alive, a malevolent entity that reveled in the violence and suffering. "We can't stay here," I urged, my voice hoarse with fear and fatigue. "This place, it's a grave." As we retreated from the cavern, the reality of what we had witnessed weighed heavily on us. The transformation of the villager was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a deeper, more widespread evil. The moor was not just changing. It was being transformed into a realm of horror, where the line between man and monster was blurred by a corruption too dark to fathom. As we emerged from the path, the night sky overhead was a tapestry of stars, indifferent to the horrors unfolding beneath. We had come seeking the source of the corruption, and what we found was a nightmare beyond comprehension. The battle we had fought was just the beginning. The true fight against the heart of this corruption was yet to come. We returned to the village under the cover of night, a heavy silence enveloping our group. The horrors we had witnessed at the cavern had left us with a profound sense of dread. The transformation of the villager into a werewolf was not just a grim spectacle. It was a harbinger of the darkness that was seeping into the very soul of the moor. The village, once a haven of tranquility, now seemed like a fragile bastion against the encroaching darkness. The villagers, sensing our grim mood, gathered around, their faces etched with fear and anticipation. Liam, with a voice that carried the weight of our grim discovery, recounted what we had witnessed. Murmurs of fear and disbelief rippled through the crowd. The revelation of the villagers' transformation sent a shockwave of terror through the community. The threat was no longer an abstract menace. It was real, tangible, and horrifyingly close. The night was restless, a tension hanging in the air like a thick fog. Then, in the darkest hours before dawn, the unthinkable happened. A coordinated assault, ferocious and terrifying, broke the night's uneasy silence. Werewolves, their forms shadowy, descended upon the village. The attack was a maelstrom of violence and chaos. The werewolves, far more strategic and organized than any natural beast, tore through the village with a frenzied bloodlust. Their howls, a chilling symphony of rage and hunger, filled the air as they ravaged everything in their path. We fought back with everything we had. Liam and Elspeth were at the forefront, their weapons flashing in the moonlight, cutting down the nightmarish assailants. I found myself locked in a desperate struggle, my own blade a meager defense against the onslaught. It was during this chaos, amidst the cacophony of battle, that tragedy struck. Rowan, who had fought valiantly by our side, was grievously wounded, a savage bite to his shoulder that left him writhing in agony. "No, no, no!" I heard myself shouting, dragging him to relative safety, his blood warm and slick on my hands. The battle raged on, the village a scene of carnage and despair. As the first light of dawn began to break, the werewolves, sensing the approaching daylight, retreated into the shadows from which they had emerged. We were left to survey the aftermath, the village looking like a war zone, homes destroyed and lives shattered. In the aftermath, the air was filled with the sounds of mourning and the acrid smell of blood and fire. The attack had not just left physical scars. It had torn the fabric of our community, leaving us exposed and vulnerable. Liam and Elspeth argued about the next course of action, their voices strained with fatigue and emotion. Elspeth advocated for a direct attack on the source of the corruption, her eyes blazing with a mix of anger and determination. "We can't just wait for them to pick us off," she insisted vehemently. Liam, however, was more cautious. "We need to understand what we're dealing with," he countered, his gaze sweeping over the wounded and the bereaved. "We can't risk more lives without a plan." Their debate was a reflection of the village's turmoil. We were at a crossroads, our next actions crucial to our survival. As the sun rose higher, casting a pale light over the devastated village, the reality of our situation was starkly clear. We were under siege, fighting an enemy that was both of our world and beyond it, and our next steps would determine the fate of us all. The aftermath of the werewolf assault left the village in a state of shock and despair. The sun, rising above the horizon, cast a somber light on the wreckage and the wounded. In the midst of this chaos, our resolve was tested like never before. Duncan, his frustration boiling over, gathered a group of villagers around him. "We can't wait for another attack. We need to strike at the heart of this curse," he declared, his voice tinged with a mix of anger and desperation. His words resonated with a segment of the villagers, those driven by fear and the desire for immediate action. Liam, standing at the center of the gathered crowd, tried to reason with Duncan. "We need a plan. A hasty attack will only lead to more death," he cautioned, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying a hint of uncertainty. But Duncan was unyielding. "I won't stand by and watch our village be destroyed," he exclaimed. And with that, he announced his intention to form a splinter group to attack the source of the corruption directly. The village, already teetering on the brink of despair, was now fractured. Some chose to follow Duncan, seeing his approach as the only viable option. Others, wary of the danger, decided to stay and fortify the village. I stood beside Liam and Elspeth, watching the village divide with a sense of foreboding. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Liam, his gaze fixed on Duncan's departing figure, replied, "We prepare. We can't let Duncan and his group face this alone. We need to follow them, ensure they don't fall into a trap." The decision was made with a heavy heart. We would venture once again into the Moor, this time to intercept Duncan's group and aid them, hoping to prevent a disaster. The preparations were swift but thorough. we gathered supplies, weapons, and a few volunteers brave enough to join us. The village, despite its divisions, came together to support our mission, understanding that our success or failure would affect the fate of us all. As we set out, the village behind us felt like a distant memory, a place of peace and simplicity now lost in the shadow of impending doom. The moor awaited us, its vast expanse both familiar and foreboding. The journey was tense, each step taking us closer to an unknown fate. The landscape of the moor had changed since our last venture. It felt more hostile, as if aware of our intentions, the land itself holding its breath. As we neared the area where we expected to find Duncan's group, the signs of their passage were evident. Trampled vegetation, discarded items, and a palpable sense of urgency marked their trail. Finally, we found them. Duncan's group, weary and on edge, had unwittingly aggravated the situation. They had stumbled upon a nest of corrupted creatures, far more dangerous than the werewolves we had encountered before. The standoff was tense. Duncan, realizing the gravity of his mistake, looked to us with a mix of relief and defiance. "We didn't know," he admitted, his voice ragged with fatigue. It was then that Morven appeared, as if summoned by the land itself. Her presence, both eerie and commanding, brought a moment of stillness to the chaos. "I can guide these creatures," she said, her voice echoing with a strange power, "but you must act swiftly." With Morven's intervention, we had a fleeting opportunity. The creatures, momentarily subdued by her influence, allowed us a chance to strike at the heart of the corruption. The alliance, formed in the heat of the moment, was fragile but necessary. Together, we braced ourselves for the confrontation that lay ahead, understanding that the fate of the village, and perhaps the moor itself, rested in our hands. Under Morven's enigmatic guidance, we advanced deeper into the moor. Our group now a mix of Liam's cautious planners and Duncan's impulsive warriors. The tension between the two factions was palpable, but the urgency of our mission forged a temporary truce. The moor had become a landscape of nightmares. The ground oozed with corruption. The trees stood like twisted sentinels, and the air was filled with a cacophony of unsettling sounds. Distant howls, the rustling of unseen creatures, and the ever-present, ominous whispering of the wind. As we traversed this desolate terrain, Morven moved with a grace that belied her half-beast form, her connection to the moor both haunting and profound. "The source lies ahead," she murmured, her voice a haunting melody that seemed to intertwine with the moor's sorrow. We arrived at a clearing where the corruption was most concentrated. At its center stood an ancient structure, an edifice that seemed to defy time itself. It was a nexus of dark energy, a focal point of the moor's suffering. The stones of the structure pulsed with a sickly light, and the air around it vibrated with malevolent power. "It's here," Liam said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The heart of it all." Duncan's group, upon seeing the structure, reacted with a mix of awe and horror. "We destroy this, and the corruption ends?" Duncan asked, his voice hopeful yet laced with doubt. Before we could formulate a plan, the situation escalated. The creatures we had encountered earlier, drawn by the energy of the Nexus, converged on our location. Their forms were a menagerie of nightmares, each more horrifying than the last. The ensuing battle was chaotic and brutal. Duncan's group, fueled by desperation, charged headlong into the fray, their cries of battle a stark contrast to the strategic precision of Liam's team. I found myself fighting back-to-back with Elspeth, our weapons moving in a deadly dance as we fended off the onslaught. The creatures were relentless, their bodies warped by the corruption, making them both unpredictable and terrifying. In the midst of the chaos, Morven revealed her true power. With a series of haunting chants, she seemed to exert a form of control over the creatures, her voice weaving a spell that momentarily subdued their rage. It was a fleeting respite, but it bought us precious time. Seizing the opportunity, Liam signaled us to focus our efforts on the Nexus. The structure, now pulsating with a frenetic energy, seemed to be the key to ending the corruption. Duncan, his initial bravado replaced with a grim determination, joined us in the assault. Together, we attacked the structure, our weapons fueled by a mix of hope and desperation. As our blades struck the ancient stones, the Nexus reacted violently. A shockwave of dark energy erupted from it, throwing us backward. The air crackled with power, the ground trembled, and for a moment, it felt as if the Moor itself was screaming in agony. The Nexus stood damaged, not destroyed. The creatures, their temporary stupor broken by the disruption, regrouped for another attack. The creatures surged forward in a wave of snarling fury, their forms a nightmare of corruption. The sound of their approach was a cacophony of growls and shrieks, a discordant symphony that chilled the blood. Liam, his face set in a grim mask, led our defense with a tactical precision that belied the chaos around us. Elspeth, her staff a blur of motion, fought with a ferocity that matched the wildness of our attackers. Duncan, his earlier bravado replaced with a focused resolve, rallied his group, their weapons flashing in the dim light. I found myself in the thick of the melee, my blade a steady rhythm of survival as I parried and struck at the grotesque forms before me. The creatures, though seemingly mindless, fought with a savage intelligence, coordinating their attacks in a way that was unnerving and new. A deafening howl pierced the air, silencing the din of combat. From the shadows, a massive werewolf emerged, its size and presence dwarfing the other creatures. Its eyes, glowing with a baleful light, fixed on us with a malevolent intelligence. The werewolf charged, its movement a blur of speed and power. It was Morven who intercepted it, her own beastly form a match for the creature's ferocity. The two collided with a force that seemed to shake the very ground, locked in a struggle that was both primal and terrifying. As they fought, Morven's voice rang out, a chant that was both haunting and commanding. The werewolf, despite its rage, seemed to falter under the weight of her words. It was then that Morven, with a surge of strength, managed to pin the beast to the ground. "Strike now!" she yelled, her voice cutting through the chaos. Seizing the moment, we focused our efforts on the werewolf. Liam and Duncan led the charge, their weapons finding their mark. The creature let out a final, anguished howl before collapsing, its form dissolving into the Moor like smoke into the air. The remaining creatures, as if sensing the loss of their leader, began to retreat, disappearing into the shadows from which they had emerged. Morven, her energy spent, collapsed to the ground, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. "The Nexus," she whispered. "Destroy it." Our weapons struck with a desperation born of hope and fear, and then, with a final collective effort, the structure shattered, releasing a shockwave of energy that rippled through the Moor. As the energy dissipated, a profound stillness settled over the land. The corruption that had plagued the Moor seemed to lift, the air clearing, the ground firming beneath our feet. The night sky, once obscured by a malevolent haze, now revealed the stars in all their celestial glory. We stood in the aftermath, a sense of disbelief mingling with relief. The battle had ended with the destruction of the Nexus, the heart of the corruption that had turned the Moor into a land of nightmares. But the victory was not without cost. Morven, having used her last ounce of strength to help us, lay motionless, her sacrifice a final act of redemption for her role as the Moor's guardian. We turned our gaze to the village, to the people who had endured so much. The Moor, now freed from the grip of darkness, whispered a sigh of relief. And we, the weary survivors, knew that our story was far from over. The curse had been lifted, but the scars it left behind would shape our path forward, a reminder of the resilience and courage that had seen us through the darkest of times. The village stirred to life as we returned, awakening to a new day that bore the fresh promise of hope. The air was clearer, the earth beneath our feet firmer, as if the land itself had been rejuvenated by the destruction of the Nexus. The sight of Morven's lifeless form among us, however, cast a somber shadow over the celebration. Her sacrifice had been pivotal, and her loss was felt deeply by all. Amidst the ruins left by the werewolf assault, we gathered to honor those who had fallen. Morven's body, along with those of villagers and comrades lost in the battle, were laid to rest with respect and solemnity. Liam and Elspeth, standing side by side, addressed the villagers. Their words were not just of mourning, but also of gratitude and hope. "We have faced the darkest night together," Liam said, his voice resonant with the strength that had guided us through the chaos. "And we emerge stronger, united by our courage and our shared loss." Elspeth, her fiery spirit undimmed, added, "Our journey doesn't end here. We rebuild, not just our homes, but our lives. The Moor has been freed from its curse, and so have we. It's time to heal, to grow, and to live." In the days that followed, we rebuilt homes, tended to the wounded, and comforted the bereaved. The Moor, once a source of fear and suffering, now offered solace and resources to aid in our recovery. Its transformation was a mirror to our own, a journey from darkness into light. In the midst of this rebuilding, there was a sense of unity that transcended past conflicts. Duncan's followers, once divided in their approach, now worked hand in hand with the rest of the villagers. The barriers that had once separated us had been broken down by the shared experience of our struggle and triumph. The village, once overshadowed by the Moor's curse, now stood as a beacon of hope and resilience. The scars of our ordeal remained, a reminder of what we had endured and overcome, but they also told a story of survival and strength. Liam and Elspeth, their leadership forged through fire and darkness, stood as pillars of the community, guiding us with a balance of wisdom and passion. Their once differing views now blended into a harmonious vision for the future. The Moor now whispered a different song, one of peace and renewal. It was a constant reminder of the cycle of struggle and triumph, a testament to the enduring spirit of the land and its people. As the story of our ordeal passed into memory, it left a legacy. We had faced the abyss and emerged victorious, not just over the darkness of the Moor, but over the shadows within ourselves. The village, once a simple community, had become a symbol of hope, a light that would shine brightly, undimmed by the trials of the past, guiding us into a future filled with promise and new beginnings.